One afternoon in 2001 or 2002, I was playing some Half-Life mod or another, and I got the urge to switch over to spectator mode and take a peek outside the walls of the map, something I was, and still am actually, fond of doing from time to time. You never really know what you're gonna run into when you do this. Often enough, it's nothing but empty space, but occasionally, you'll be rewarded with some kind of Easter egg that the map's author left behind for anyone who cared to have a poke around. I can remember spotting something floating in the black abyss, a small room, far below the bounds of the structured competitive FPS gameplay that, presumably, continued above without my involvement. I remember a container of some kind, maybe a freezer, maybe a suitcase. Unfortunately, the spectral spectator form that allowed me to travel down here also made interaction with the game world impossible. But there has to be something in here. Maybe if I move the camera just right. I recently played through the demo for No Players Online, the newly released expanded version of the 2019 short horror game by the same name. In it, the player is tasked with solving the mysteries behind a haunted prototype version of a competitive first-person shooter. Shortly after starting up a match on CTF Gorge, said prototype's only map, I swam beneath a wall and began to plummet, watching as the concrete confines of the game world disappeared above me before landing in a vast pool of water below. Empty, save for a small box-shaped object. A room, actually, barely visible in the distance. And this giant eel monster with a human-like face, but let's ignore that part. Swimming towards this distant room, I felt myself transported back to that Half-Life horror experience. A dredged-up memory of coming across something a bit too scary for my young brain. It almost felt like being punished for sticking my nose where it didn't belong. But I'd be lying if I said I don't still feel a faint thrill every time I no-clip around in some old map, as if doing so was a form of virtual trespassing. I have a bit of a soft spot for found footage horror, or really anything that's similarly playing around with verisimilitude in its presentation, and I've been watching a lot of it recently. A camcorder found in the woods depicting unexplainable phenomena. A documentary left unfinished after the mysterious death of its filmmaker. An old, forgotten VHS tape that curses anyone who dares to watch it. I love the way that art in this genre, when done well, can give you the feeling that you've stumbled upon something you aren't supposed to be seeing. And I haven't been able to shake the idea that there's some essential connection between found footage series and films and my no-clip experience all those years ago. For me, the fun of found footage horror is the sense of danger that comes along with it. The best examples give you the feeling that what you're about to watch isn't following the rules of standard filmmaking or subject to the demands of investors, whether that's actually true or not. I love that it's a genre where having a smaller budget and smaller team is often so clearly beneficial to the finished work, and simply throwing better effects or more expensive hardware into the mix often results in something that feels less authentic and less dangerous. There are quite a few games that have tried to emulate found footage horror over the years, but I'd argue that most of the bigger examples don't really tap into that feeling of danger, and the visuals associated with home video and consumer-grade cameras don't carry the same weight when transferred directly onto a video game. If you put on a movie that's shot on video, even one without any kind of found footage style framing device, all of those visual flaws and artifacts immediately signal to you that you're about to watch something underground, and that you should truly be ready for anything. A VHS filter slapped onto a game simply can't have that same effect. That's not to say that I wholly dislike when games emulate the look of these movies. It can be cool, and I've certainly enjoyed games that have done this, but I think games that want to capture the appeal of found footage horror should lean more into the interactive nature of the medium and aesthetics that signify an amateur production from within the history of games rather than film. While a portion of No Players Online does involve exploring the eerily empty environments of its FPS prototype, the majority of the demo actually takes place one layer behind it, within the confines of a fictional mid-90s Windows-like operating system called MC93, a system that essentially gamifies the investigational elements so commonly depicted in found footage horror. Developers Beeswax Games did a great job with the frankly monumental task of creating a believably functional operating system and an in-world internet that feels expansive, but still limited enough in scope to deliver puzzle solving and story beats. Though your web browsing is primarily restricted to Game Create, a game development forum akin to sites like the real-life Daily Click, it's a beautifully fleshed out message board. Forum regulars will chat about various topics, but also share art, music, and even full game prototypes that you can download, unzip, and play within MC93. I was kinda blown away when I realized you can browse through and even edit some of the files associated with these games, allowing you to unleash your inner elite hacksaw and cheat your way through Fishing with Knives 2. It's little details like this that really make No Players Online feel authentic, drawing out childhood memories of messing around with game files and downloading suspicious .zips with reckless abandon. There are actually a decent number of games out there, released in the last few years in particular, similarly utilizing the experience of interacting with a personal computer in the early days of the internet as a sort of framework to tell horror stories within, and I think it's easy enough to see why. Growing up together with the young internet came along with a lot of concern and fear that the computer was, or at least could be, a dangerous place for you to be. Some of that concern was aimed towards protecting your family's expensive hardware purchase. Look out for viruses, don't click on any suspicious links. The other fear was less to do with what you were getting up to on the computer and more to do with what other people were getting up to, and the fact that those people now had a way to reach out to you if they so desired. There's a sort of etiquette to using someone else's computer, a line that you intuitively understand the position of after you've had a computer of your own for a while. Using the calculator, painting a nice picture, taking some notes, maybe browsing the web a little bit, all things you might reasonably expect a friend to do if they ask to borrow your laptop for a few minutes. Personal, that P in PC, is an easy word to gloss over, but your computer really can be a very personal thing. And I think that despite the intangible nature of its internal digital world, someone snooping through your virtual belongings can feel just as intrusive as any real-world trespassing. 2025's Vile Exhumed from developer Final Girl Games sits you down in front of a total stranger's personal computer, hands you the keys, and invites you to throw all of that etiquette out the window. There is a relatively harmless thrill to some of the early game snooping. I particularly enjoyed the found footage video rental page and the Video Nasty Swap, a community dedicated to trading obscure horror movies. Vile really knows ball in this regard, and it was fun to look through all of the descriptions and cover art for the made-up films on these websites, which are cleverly mixed in with real movies, giving the whole thing an air of believability. There's a certain appeal to perusing crusty old horror tapes that you've never heard of before. You're just as likely to find trash as you are to find treasure. Sometimes you find both. But there's a reason why so many found footage horror films and series return to the idea of an evil videotape over and over again. Given how ubiquitous camcorders and VCRs were for so long, it's easy to imagine that someone out there could have put something truly horrible to tape, and maybe it's just floating around somewhere, waiting for someone else, maybe even you, to stumble onto it. On the computer, that person is just a username away, on the same niche web forum as you, and they want to trade horror films, and wouldn't it be easier to just meet up in person? They happen to live so close by after all. It isn't long before you start to question exactly what kind of person this computer belongs to, if the username ShootTheDog77 somehow wasn't already setting off any alarms for you. Nearly every found footage horror film has a moment where its characters start to put together that they're onto something terrible, but an obsession with unraveling the mystery at hand keeps pushing them past any sensible stopping point. Vile really nails this element of the genre and makes a great case for how effective a story like this can be when it's interactive, when it's you finding the horrors. Each password-protected item on the desktop presents the promise of more answers, but also an opportunity to turn around and walk away, and each time you choose to continue onward by piecing passwords together from various digital documents, you also choose to dig yourself deeper into a hole of increasingly unsettling revelations. Every time I pried open one of these lockboxes, I genuinely felt a spike of anxiety. Vile uses a lot of real photos and videos, and even an in-world horror adventure game to deliver its more visceral scares, but what's really stuck with me is the writing found in its instant messages and emails, which manages to be more upsetting than any blood and/or guts. Vile Exhumed is another victim of Valve's increasingly anti-art, scattershot approach to deciding what is or isn't allowed on Steam, and so I've done my best to spoil as little as possible here because the game is available for free, and I think you should play it for yourself if it interests you, though I definitely recommend heeding the game's opening content warning if you choose to do so. While the faux operating systems in games like No Players Online and Vile Exhumed do a good job of convincingly recreating the dangers of the computer within the relative safety of their own internal systems, there are games that cleverly opt to remove that safety net entirely, effectively bringing the horror into the real world, so to speak. Probably the most popular recent example of a game that does this is 2023's Myhouse.wad. I won't go into depth about Myhouse here, simply because it's been talked about plenty, both on and off of YouTube, but what makes it interesting for our purposes is the way that it uses its nature as a mod of an existing retro game to its advantage. In order for something to feel believably haunted, whether that be a house, a VHS tape, or a computer game, it has to have history, and it has to feel personal. Myhouse is a mod for Doom posted onto the forums of the popular modding site Doomworld, alongside a story of an attempt to finish a project started by the poster's recently deceased childhood friend. The fact that the user's account was created in 2004, rather than that same day or anything even remotely recent, grants at least some level of believability to the claim. The game's files are hosted on what appears to be the user's personal Google Drive account, and in an understatedly clever move, this link doesn't take you directly to these specific files as you'd expect, instead requiring you to look through a folder or two to find them. It's hard not to feel like you're intruding in someone's space, even if just a little bit. You'll also need some basic understanding of what to even do with the mod files. Not exactly rocket science, but a barrier to entry for anyone not already familiar with Doom modding. It can be difficult to suspend your disbelief when it comes to a lot of other cursed or haunted games because, while they often do their best to emulate the way old games look and feel, if you have even a passing familiarity with retro games, it's typically very obvious that they're merely modern simulacrums. It'd be hard to convince someone your brand new home is haunted, and that same logic holds true when the game you're being told is from 1999 quite clearly is not. Myhouse looks and feels like an old game because, well, it kind of is. All of this contributes to the sense that Myhouse is an object with history and a personal connection on a level that simply wouldn't be possible if you could just buy the thing on Steam. The homemade vibes and obvious personal touches in works like Myhouse can benefit a work beyond simply making it spookier, though. As much as horror exists as a genre meant to scare you, it also exists as a genre meant to make you laugh, often using humor or camp elements as a way to disarm you before bringing in the big scares, and I'd be remiss if I didn't explore this side of the genre as well. 2013's WNUF Halloween special didn't earn its cult status based on its comparatively bloody ending sequence, but rather on just how authentic its preceding parody of a local television station's Halloween programming feels. I think the appeal lies in the scrappiness of it, the community-focused localness of it all, and I view community-made works for games as a sort of digital equivalent to that. Swiss Cheese Halloween 2002, also known as Swiss Cheese's Halloween 02, aka Swiss_Cheese Halloween Mod, or alternatively also, Half-Life Halloween Mod, is a Halloween-themed scarification for Half-Life 1 created by Swiss Cheese, released just in time for Halloween 2002. Swiss Cheese is a fun little mod overall, ticking off just about every box when it comes to Halloween vibes. Fighting off ghosts and humanoid jack-o'-lanterns in pumpkin patches, contending with scarecrows and wolfmen in the cornfields before a crop circle abduction by little gray aliens, who are, at least, kind enough to drop you off at the local witch's house. The mod ends with a shockingly long ride down the River Styx, battling through the depths of hell, and a final confrontation with death itself, surrounded by cheering ghosts, as well as advertisements for the author's then upcoming mod, Club Swiss.
Let me guess, Scotch in the rocks? You sure like your liquor.
It's all charming stuff, but for me, none of it really compares to the neighborhood found in the very first map of the game. Swiss cheese exists in a perfect sweet spot, just about playable and charmingly amateur, a combination that's often enjoyable to me, but is especially potent when it comes to capturing the spirit of Halloween.
With my brains and your brawn, we'll make an excellent team.
The fun of Halloween is seeing familiar faces and familiar places, but dressed up in unexpected, scary, or funny ways. That's exactly what Swiss Cheese Halloween is. It's Half-Life, very obviously so, but draped in a sheet with some eye holes cut into it, pretending to be someone else for a few hours. One of my favorite elements of Swiss Cheese is the Halloween decor found in the yards and exteriors of the homes throughout the neighborhood. There's a delightful lack of cohesion to these cardboard cutout-like 2D objects. A digital recreation of that box in your basement full of random Halloween bullshit that you've collected over the years. The best part is that, like any physical object in your basement box, each of these images has a history to uncover. Amongst the photoreal leaves, trees, and grass outside the player character's house is a cute little illustrated owl on a stump, apparently named Rutherford. According to the Green Man, aka Orion, aka Greg, Rutherford is a website familiar created by his wife, a Wiccan priestess named Rowan, aka Sasha, who is typically available for the commission of your very own website familiar, but as of December 1998, was too busy with the website for the Witches Anti-Discrimination League to take on any new work. Orion and Rowan's sites both dedicate a lot of space to the discussion of paganism, druidry, and Wicca.
God bless those pagans.
But also their own individual interests and work. Orion writes about his experiences working as a nurse within the prison system and his desire to not only heal the incarcerated physically, but help them regain and maintain a sense of self-worth regardless of past actions. Rowan's page has a section dedicated to creating and selling custom dolls based on mythological figures and creatures, made from old scraps of fabric and Barbie dolls abandoned by her daughter, detailing the work and care that went into each piece. Plastered to the front of the same house is a welcome banner depicting a few Grim Reaper-like characters. Phantasms, actually, from the 1997 horror-themed FPS Blood, though you'll also find them making frequent appearances on a classic style of early internet webpage, the Halloween image dump. Reverse image search any yard decoration in Swiss Cheese Halloween, and you're all but guaranteed to uncover a treasure trove of these spooky time capsules, which are still just as fun to browse today as they were back then. I love the full spread of pumpkins on display here, but we can all agree the early 3D model interpretations are the best, right?
Video Game Underground has the best video games in town, has the best prices on games around. Video Game Underground has the best prices on games around. Video Game Underground.
Below the Phantasm banner is this declaration of the homeowner's love for ghosts, featuring two very cool sun-spectacled specters, likely inspired by Michael Myers' iconic Halloween costume in, well, Halloween. This dude is all over the image dumps as well, but my favorite page these little ghouls directed me to was the My Real Ghost Photos page, itself part of another staple genre of websites on the early internet, the Definitely Very Real Paranormal Activity compilation. This particular series of pages was a blast to flip through, featuring photos ranging from actually kinda spooky, to very silly, to pretty cool, to each photo is also accompanied by a short description written by someone's poor meemaw with a bad case of broken caps lock key. Alright, so I would love for you to read the story out loud, and then I'm going to reveal the photo that they attached with the story.
A woman took this photo and was shocked upon development to see a strange semi-transparent image of a young boy in the photo. She says that she does not recognize the boy and has no idea how he could have gotten into the picture. She does say that she has had paranormal experiences at her home. Also note that the boy has his left arm cut off. This picture has been known as the car thing. It was taken by the man in the driver's seat. The thing in the window is a mystery. Some say it's the passenger's trouser leg. Others have said it is a tree, even though the man who has took the photo and his passenger say it couldn't have been a tree because the car was moving at the time, and has had no comment on the possibility of it being the passenger's pants leg. But what I don't understand is that if he was driving, how could he have taken the picture? Some have said the car looks like it was sitting still at the time. If anyone has any suggestions on what this could be, please give me an email.
Fuck in the Wormiverse is that?
I don't have any info on this photo. If someone does, please give me an email. It sure does look chilling to me.
Man, I need more info on this.
Walking through this neighborhood is relatively quiet in the way you'd expect from an autumn evening in the suburbs. Crickets chirp and the wind howls, but occasionally a can be heard, hollered from the groups of kids roaming the streets. Well, not exactly kids, but you get it. Some of the homes emit familiar sounds and tunes from televisions playing Halloween horror classics within. And though some of these homes lack any signs of life, all of them can be entered by the player. One house is even home to a ghost in the attic. It's cute stuff. However, intentional or not, there's an undeniable eeriness to some of the interior spaces in Swiss Cheese Halloween's first map. This is a hard thing to quantify, or at least a hard thing to put into words, but there is something about spaces made in Half-Life's Gold Source engine that produces creepy, eerie vibes more potently than any other I can think of. A few years later, Halloween Day of 2005 to be exact, Swiss Cheese released a follow-up to his Half-Life Halloween mod called Pumpkin Night, a mod for the then still fresh Half-Life 2. Technically, what you're seeing here is Pumpkin Night Redux, an updated version of the mod released in 2006 that addresses issues players had with the first release, which Swiss Cheese admits was rushed out the door in order to meet a self-imposed Halloween deadline. Even in its improved form, however, Pumpkin Night is a pumpkin seed shell of its Half-Life 1 predecessor, containing very little of that special Halloween sauce that made Swiss Cheese Halloween so endearing. Similarly to its Half-Life 1 counterparts, Pumpkin Night begins in a suburban neighborhood environment full of trick-or-treaters and decorated houses, but the whole thing feels sort of lifeless, despite the more realistic visuals. Oh, this is cute. There's nothing like this.
Dude, you ready or what?
Who are you supposed to be? Batkenstein?
Screw off, Sean. I look good, bitch.
Dude, look at your hat.
Even the interior spaces with the Source Engine's more advanced lighting don't really hold a candle to the moody spaces rendered in Swiss Cheese Halloween. To be clear, I don't think this is simply because Half-Life 1 is older. Just this last Halloween, Doom mapper H. Doom Guy released Hallow's Eve 1990X, a Doom wad that also depicts a suburban Halloween night gone awry. This one really nails the vibes and is dripping with autumn atmosphere, decorated every bit as well as Swiss Cheese. Actually, we can get very close with our comparison here because Hallow's Eve seems to be directly inspired by Swiss Cheese, featuring some of the exact same decorations and horror film stills found in that mod. I enjoyed playing Hallow's Eve 1990X, and it is very cute, but again, there is just something about this sort of environment in Half-Life 1 that's uniquely evocative. I think for me, these visuals work in a similar way to the 2022 film Skinamarink. These types of spaces and the imagery associated with them are often used to invoke nostalgia in a sort of predatory way, even more so recently as it seems to have become a go-to subject matter for AI slop accounts. Skinamarink feels like a criticism of this sort of thing, taking these same ostensibly cozy locations from your childhood and twisting them into something to be fearful of.
Hello. Who are you?
You hear something?
Come up there.
They're waiting for you, Gordon. In the test chamber.
Look under the bed.
Dad! No!
Now, I realize that some of you watching this right now are thinking to yourself that I'm essentially choosing to scare myself by ignoring the intended playstyle of this game and making it seem scarier than it is by walking around slowly and selectively framing these empty rooms just right, and, well, yes, I am doing that. It's fun. And apparently I'm not the only one that feels this way, because there's actually an entire game based around doing this. "2023's Interior Worlds" from developer Soda is one of the coolest and smartest games I've ever played, and is another great example of how to transfer the appeal of found horror into a video game, not through research in front of your computer screen, but instead by plopping you directly into the shoes of the camera-wielding, ghost-adventuring documentarian. Interior Worlds is a very simple game for the most part, tasking the player with taking a set number of photos within each of its 10 distinct locations, and has little in the way of story or exposition to its benefit. Though you're able to take as many photos as you like, progression is gated through a series of preset photo points scattered throughout each level, represented by swirling clouds of mist. As long as the swirling mist is in frame, you're free to approach your shot from any angle, adjust the focus and zoom level, and even play around with a wide range of filters and frames, most of which are unlocked while exploring the game's mundane, but eerily empty and uncanny environments. I love how subtle the game is. It's completely bereft of jump scares, and its horror elements ramp up surprisingly slowly. Most of the photos you take, especially early on, produce nothing out of the ordinary, but you'll eventually start noticing discrepancies between what you saw, what the camera saw, and what you think you saw. Maybe it was just a smudge on the lens or a trick of the light. Before long though, these anomalies become impossible to deny. There are some clues here and there if you're observant, but the game never paints a full picture of what exactly you're catching on film. And this lack of knowledge always had me holding my breath in those brief moments between taking a shot and viewing the developed photograph. To me, the smartest element of Interior Worlds is how expressive it allows the player to be, and how well that expressiveness synergizes with the found horror genre. I often found myself playing around with the lighting in a room in order to get the mood just right, or purposefully swinging the camera during a shot in hopes of producing a blurrier, and therefore spookier, photograph. There's been plenty of horror games over the years that involve using a camera, but none of these games capture the spirit of found footage horror like Interior Worlds. Not even Outlast, a game explicitly about creating found footage horror, really comes close. Wander the halls of the abandoned school in Interior Worlds without unsheathing your camera, and you'll never really come across anything particularly spooky. The horror here doesn't exist until you make it exist. Whether something is scary or not is about as subjective as it gets, and allowing the player to essentially decide when and how to scare themselves is kind of genius and results in one of the best interpretations of interactive found horror that I've encountered yet. Also, this game is very funny at times. There's an entire secret hunting element in the game involving photographing that I will obfuscate visually here so as not to spoil it too much, but taking these particular shots regularly sent me cackling. My favorite photo overlay in the game is this one that cycles through various YouTube thumbnail bait-esque red circles and arrows, in part because it makes these shots look even more funny, but also because it emphasizes just how paranoid your photo album looks by the end of the game. Look, don't you see it? It's right there! Can't you see that I'm onto something here? Over the last few months, I've been getting together with friends to watch through the Senritsu Kaiki File Kawasugi series, 10 horror films released over the course of about 10 years by director Kōji Shiraishi. Shiraishi is probably best known for his 2005 film Noroi, wherein paranormal researcher Kobayashi investigates a series of strange occurrences, presented in the form of an in-world documentary, itself a compilation of television programs, interviews, and found footage. The Senritsu Kaiki films similarly follow a group of paranormal investigators documenting their adventures, though in more of a Monster of the Week type format. Well, most of them anyway. There's this thing that most of Shiraishi's films do that my friend group has come to refer to as Shiraishi's trick, a two-step process of setup and payoff. The setup is simply to show you some kind of footage in its raw form, allowing you to take it in from a neutral standpoint. The payoff comes in playing it back again, but this time hyper-focusing on something scary that you may or may not have noticed the first time through. I don't know if fully playing one of these scenes will trip some YouTube copyright stuff, but that's okay, because I love this trick so much that I already set something up over 2 years ago that seemingly no one noticed, so I'll finally pay that off for you here. But some of this shit out of context is pretty horrifying. I think a big part of why these visuals are effective is that there's an inherent allure to shot-on-video media within the horror genre. It can give this sense that But some of this shit out of context is pretty horrifying. I think a big part of why these Other movies have done this as well, of course, but the way Shiraishi does it is unmatched and never gets old. The conventional horror wisdom of What you don't see as scarier is completely obliterated by Shiraishi and crew with this one maneuver. A really fun side effect of this trick is that this also results in a lingering sense of paranoia, priming you to constantly be on the lookout for anything out of the ordinary in the background. One of the scariest moments in the Senritsu Kaiki series for me was a scene from the beginning of its 8th installment, where two girls climb a fence to do some nighttime breaking and entering in their old middle school. We were convinced we spotted something horrifying here, but after the movie ended without ever calling back to it, we immediately rewound back to that moment for a freeze frame and... Yeah, it's probably just a boom mic. Shutter Story from developer Frostwood Interactive is an upcoming horror game that weaponizes paranoia against the player in a similar fashion, tasking you with investigating a series of family photos in search of evidence of paranormal activity. All within a surprisingly convincing Windows XP-era software pastiche called Spectral Aware. As the manual for Spectral Aware states, true hauntings are actually quite rare, and you should remember to operate under the assumption that the majority of these photographs are lacking in any supernatural shenanigans. For the first few photos, your tools of analysis are limited to adjustments of the exposure and contrast of the image, but your options broaden as the demo progresses. Before you smash that haunted button, you'll need to be able to specify what type of haunting is actually being depicted. These categories and subcategories similarly open up as you progress, and it's surprisingly fun to consult with the manual and consider your options, especially if you're already familiar with some of them from other media. You've got classics like ghostly figures, spirit orbs, unexplained myths, a face staring back from your toast. But some, like impossible events and world inconsistencies, are a little more complex and require more careful consideration to evaluate, especially as the game starts throwing video into the mix. Something I really love here is that the game does not indicate if your assessment of whether the photo was haunted or not is correct, at least until after the demo is over. I was a bit skeptical that this gameplay would hold up after the first few rounds of photos, but by the time I had the full suite of tools and haunting categories available, I found myself really mulling over each image and debating internally as to whether I was just seeing what I wanted to see, or if I'd actually uncovered true evidence of the paranormal. However, I've been purposely hiding an element of the game up until now, so here's what the first few minutes of the demo actually look like. I have to admit, after only seeing screenshots of the Spectral Aware software on social media, loading this up and being confronted with these uncanny scenes that look like they're straight out of a different genre of game definitely threw me off a bit. This aesthetic is a little bizarre and even seems tonally at odds with the investigation gameplay, but it kinda worked for me by the end for a couple of reasons. One is simply that it occasionally cracked me up. Maybe the humor isn't intentional, but as we've discussed, some of the best horror out there can also get a laugh or two out of you. The second reason is that the family's photos seem to be mostly real photos, with the faces of these character models plastered on top of them. If the photos were entirely made with CG, I don't think they'd have anywhere near the same impact. Mashing them up in this way allows the characters to show up both in the story segments and in the photos, and honestly kind of adds to the uncanny creepiness of it all, at least for me. The demo for Shutter Story is over before we can find out what ends up happening with all of these haunted photographs, but thanks to a game released over 20 years ago on the original PlayStation, we can make a pretty well-educated guess. Outside of various forms of investigation, there's another activity that crops up time and time again down in the found footage mines, regardless of what part of the world you're digging around in, and that is exorcism. So I think it's clear that the responsible thing to do with this giant stack of haunted photographs is to send them over to our local big titty goth GF exorcist to properly dispose of them. Kowai Shashin Tales in Spirit Photography is a 2002 Japan-exclusive PS1 game developed by Media Entertainment, wherein the player takes on the role of a young woman named Hiyori, a psychic who has taken over the family business after the disappearance of her similarly supernaturally gifted father. Whereas most exorcists bravely face demonic spirits head-to-head in psychic warfare, Hiyori has instead opted to take the work-from-home route, sending demons back to the Shadow Realm whilst wearing sweatpants and from the comfort of her inherited gothic mansion. While this game tends to get categorized as kusoge, or on some level so bad it's good, I'm here to tell you that Kowai Shashin is in fact just regular-ass good. Each chapter of the game begins with a bit of narration from Hiyori, followed by the opening of a letter sent to her by people in the community, each of which contains a photograph and some kind of story to go along with it. These stories tend to be urban legend adjacent and run the gamut from enjoyably silly to properly spooky, and are followed up post-exorcism with a report written by Hiyori, who offers a bit of spirit medium wisdom delivered in an amusingly smug manner. Each of these photographs acts as an individual stage for the primary gameplay of Kowai Shashin, the Exorcism. Exorcism here is a multi-step process, beginning with identifying supernatural activity. Unlike the Windows XP-driven interface of Shutter Story, Hiyori prefers instead to keep things fully analog, carefully poring over each photo with a small magnifying glass that she wears around her neck. Pressing the X button slows this cursor down and enters it into a sort of hot or cold state, where the glass changes color from blue to yellow to red, depending on how close you are to the offending spirit. You'll want to be judicious about using this ability though, as engaging it removes a large chunk of your life candle, which continuously burns on the left side of the screen, additionally acting as a time limit for the current stage. Once you pinpoint one of these little ghoulies, you'll first need to catch it in place by hitting it with a psychic slap, delivered by pressing the face button on the controller that corresponds with the portion of the screen the spirit appears in, like a spiritual game of whack-a-mole. With the entity in place, the exorcism proper can begin. There are 9 separate moves to be performed, each consisting of a series of button inputs to be pressed in a clockwise order. While each move gets progressively stronger and does greater damage to the spirits, each button sequence also becomes more complex, and the window of time in which to press the buttons becomes tighter. Interestingly, these input sequences are static and never change throughout the entire game. While I initially found myself panicking at the sight of some of the longer button strings, by the end of the game, I was regularly smacking these spectral dorks with a level 9 "you're already dead" without breaking a sweat, mirroring Hiyori's own growth and power throughout the story. Not to say the game is easy, mind you, some of the later stages require some wicked fast response time. I showed this game to some friends the other day, and as soon as the first move popped up on screen, one of them said,
"It looks like you're voguing on these demons right now."
Yes, let's go. It's beat to beat to beat, beat, beat. It's put the beat to beat. It's put the beat to beat. It's put the beat to beat, beat, beat. It's beat to beat to beat. Who's catching the beat? Who's catching the beat? Who's catching the beat right now?
I found this very funny, but it also sort of proves that the game succeeds in what it's attempting to replicate with these button presses. A practice called Kujikiri, a ritual involving a series of 9 hand movements performed alongside spoken mantras, which Hiyori can be heard shouting following a correct input. There's a surprisingly fun rhythm to this gameplay, especially in the more difficult later stages, where you have to follow up your high-speed button blast ghost smackdown with an attempt to calm down, breathe, and carefully perform your movements. An interactive version of so many horror film exorcism scenes where a cool and collected expert is called in to do battle with a rambunctious evil spirit. It's such a smart idea, and paired with the flashy visuals and punchy sound design, it never grows stale throughout the game's brief few hours of runtime. That all being said, the star of Kowai Shashin is pretty obviously the photographs themselves. Similar in concept to Shutter Story, these are real photos that have been edited to include various supernatural phenomena, though this game's execution of that concept results in a very different visual style, one that I personally love. There are 20 different photos in the game, and I was always excited to see what sorts of little freaks would pop up next, and some of them genuinely hit as little pieces of horror art. The game may not have been a breakout success in its time, but I don't think it's particularly surprising that it's gained some notoriety in recent years. There's a perfect alignment of circumstances here: the low budget, the fidelity of the photographs, and the low resolution of the PS1 that retroactively grant the game a mark of aesthetic authenticity in much the same way that VHS grime does for found footage horror. Something about this exact level of crust and crunch over what are clearly real photos puts your brain into that "I shouldn't be looking at this" mode. There is another reason why Kowai Shashin has picked up some attention and started commanding exorbitant prices for physical copies though, and that's the fact that the game is freaking haunted. At least, according to a story originating on 2chan about a series of misfortunes, unexplainable phenomena, and even death plaguing the development team and those around them. It's a fun little spooky tale, but not one I'll detail here, as it's been told better than I could do in an essay over on Sundoku Diving, which delves into the story of the supposed curse and provides additional cultural context. Highly recommend checking that out if you're interested. But that brings us full circle, back to a story left unfinished that is mine to tell. What exactly did I encounter in that box over 2 decades ago? I initially worried that I wouldn't be able to track down this very specific map from a half-remembered Half-Life moment over 20 years ago, but it turns out my experience isn't a terribly uncommon one, as the map from my memory is somewhat notorious amongst people in the Half-Life community. This is AHL 5AM. A map created by Hondo for the Half-Life 1 mod Action Half-Life. Originally released in 1999, Action Half-Life is an attempt to slot the stylish gunfights from the world of action cinema into Half-Life's fast-paced deathmatch multiplayer. The mod revels in action films in a way that only a non-commercial release could, listing off what movies each weapon is featured in, recreating iconic spaces from various films, as well as offering a wide variety of characters and actors to play as, fully embracing the player's natural desire to smash their action figures together to determine whether Arnold Schwarzenegger could beat Ghost Dog in a dual-wield pistol battle. Typically set in relatively realistic, modern urban environments, Hondo's maps are, on the surface, not especially dissimilar from their contemporaries in AHL or other mods. However, all 6 of their maps for AHL have darker elements that set them apart from the default maps that come included with the mod. Sometimes this manifests as more of a general creepy vibe, as is the case with Hondo's Death House, one of Hondo's first maps released for AHL. Despite the somewhat dramatic name, the titular Death House is notably devoid of death when explored solo in this way, but its tight, narrow hallways, low ceilings, and odd proportions all contribute to a general feeling of claustrophobia, and the home's frequent dramatic shifts in lighting give the whole space an eerie atmosphere that I really love. Other maps, like No Credit, are nearly entirely innocuous, occasionally even silly at first glance. But look a little closer and you'll find inclusions that are hard not to wonder about. like this ominous, seemingly impassable doorway to a deep stairwell, or this equally out-of-reach office room visible only from inside of a cramped air duct. Occasionally, these maps do dip into full-on horror, however, ranging from a little cheeky bit of blood to some surprisingly gory murder scenes. Though maybe not so surprising if we look back at some of Hondo's work before Action Half-Life. Scientist Hunt is another multiplayer mod released similarly early in Half-Life's lifespan, which places players into a murderous competition wherein they're asked to obliterate Black Mesa's lovable Scream Queens for points. Whoever piles their bodies the highest wins. Hondo authored the majority of the maps sent for Scientist Hunt, and while most of these maps are relatively basic, there's a definite affinity for blood and guts on display here, but even this is just the tip of the iceberg. When I said these maps are ordinary on the surface, I meant that quite literally, because what Hondo's maps are really known for is what lurks beneath them. Labyrinths of surreal visuals, complex puzzles, goofy in-jokes, and bloody horror imagery. Vast underworlds that Hondo refers to as horrible, horrible secrets. While my own childhood experience with Hondo's work involves exploring AHL 5am with the assistance of NoClip, these horrible secrets are designed to be navigated without cheating. So in order to demonstrate that, let's head back over to Hondo's death house. If we press the use key on this portrait in the downstairs bedroom and make our way to the garage quickly enough, the door will become translucent for a brief window of time. Entering the doorway transports us out of the bounds of the map and into a small fenced-in yard with a pale blue sky and bright yellow sun that, when shot, cracks the sky open, spilling forth a rain of Leon the Professionals. Leons the Professional? Leons the Professionals? Whatever, shooting the newly exposed moon teleports us again, this time to a surreal black space with high contrast colored platforms and a spinning clock-like apparatus. Interacting with the blue button at the top of the platform sends us on a series of small tasks, like shooting a meat lamp in a room of ankle-high blood and slumped-over Leons, with the completion of each task marking the back wall with a colored line. The final task takes us into a strange, full-bright version of one of the bedrooms back on the surface, likely Hondo's room judging by the decor. Hondo seems to be a big fan of the Japanese rock band X Japan, as posters of its members and references to them can be found all throughout Hondo's AHL maps. Attacking nearly any object in the room results in a squishy mess, and stepping out into the pink void reveals that the room itself is made entirely of meat. To complete the sequence, we'll need to slap this particular portrait of X Japan member Hide, which teleports us back to the hub area, where a newly opened pathway welcomes us to the house's final secret, an alleyway with a large photo, presumably of Hondo, who tells us, "I hate you and you know it," while we take damage and die slowly. Bear in mind that this is the least complex collection of secrets in one of Hondo's maps. Some of these underworlds are truly massive, occasionally requiring the work of multiple people to uncover, and there's even a sort of storyline to piece together here if you're truly dedicated. Some of these secrets involve some pretty interesting experimental horror as well. Imagine firing up Action Half-Life and loading up the first populated server you see, one running a map called AHL Block War. Unbeknownst to you, another player, one you haven't even seen, has just activated the final stage of the map's horrible secret. One moment, you're racking up kills dressed as Pamela Anderson in her iconic action hero role, Barbed Wire. The next, you and 9 other unfortunate souls suddenly find yourselves trapped within a pitch-black room, crammed inside of rectangular vats full of orange liquid. It's such a twistedly funny idea to throw the whole server of players down here who likely have no clue what's happening, and who leave their gaming session with what must sound like a pretty tall tale for their friends at school the next day. If you're interested in a complete rundown of Hondo's horrible secrets, I'd recommend checking out this video by The Monotonist that fully documents these experiences. If you want to dive into them for yourself, I recommend checking out the Hondo Archive, a webpage with information about each of the maps, as well as links to download them. The funniest thing about that final secret of Hondo's death house is that it's just sitting a few feet away from the house you spawn in front of. This whole convoluted process is really just a Rube Goldberg machine to get you over this pathetically short road barrier that looks like you should be able to just jump over anyway. In that abandoned high school level of Interior Worlds, one of the classrooms has a suspicious little nook behind a shelf that you can squeeze into, and if you walk towards the back wall, you'll clip out of bounds and fall under the map. I came across this completely by accident while playing, and it really did convince me that I broke the game for a second, but after turning the corner, it was pretty obvious what was happening. Interior Worlds has been out for a few years now, but I only ended up playing it just a few months ago. I think in part because I was, unfairly in retrospect, lumping it in with the garbage dump's worth of low-effort, liminal horror games of the last few years. Interior Worlds is more than willing to get very silly with some of its secrets, so I was pleasantly surprised by its restrained depiction of the back rooms here. A road barrier to curiously climb over that leaves you with more questions than it does answers. I think another reason I'm so drawn to found horror as a genre is that, because it so frequently operates around mysteries, it also tends to leave at least some questions unanswered. While I can understand on some level the desire people have to come together and talk theories or speculate about unanswered questions and art they like, this seems to frequently mutate and devolve into something that's no longer horror. What once was a creepy photo of some weird rooms eventually becomes an entire universe with levels and rules and wiki pages, an absolute devotion to lore at the expense of all mystery. As, well, dumb honestly as the original story posted with the backrooms photo was, there is something that rings true about the author's choice to connect this image with the very video gamey term no clip. Though you're not supposed to be able to actually fly the dodo plane in Grand Theft Auto 3, the moment people online started sharing a method to do so involving lightly tapping the D-pad up and down, I rushed to my PS2 and started flying around, eventually coming across a strange, seemingly half-finished city in the ocean. I'd later learn the technical reason this ghost town exists, how it's used for the game's opening cutscene, but for me at the time, this was a bizarre new space within a world that I thought I knew like the back of my hand. Were there more, even stranger things to find out there if I could just pass that next barrier? What would I find in this office if I could just find a way out of this vent? What lies over that brick wall? A series of empty rooms that stretch into infinity? Maybe another dimension made entirely of worms? Or just a boom mic on the loose? I wonder if this is the line of thinking that pushed Hondo into spending what must have been many hours grafting these comically enormous and obtuse puzzles onto their otherwise normal multiplayer maps. You really want to know what's behind the barrier? Well, you're gonna have to work for it, and you might not like what you see along the way. I loaded up AHL 5am and spent a lot of time trying to decide whether to ghost my way down to the box room or to go with Hondo's intended route. Is it more in the spirit of what I'm making here if I put in the work, or do I just hop over the barrier head first like I did as a kid? Fuck it, we're hopping the fence. So, it's just some anime gore. Enough to shock me a little bit as a 12-year-old or whatever, but I mean, if you were on the internet at the time, you almost certainly saw worse, and probably not by choice. From the first second I started thinking about this project, I knew I didn't want to reveal what was in the suitcase. Honestly, I actually considered not looking in here again at all, even just for myself. Why ruin this spooky little memory that's been floating around in my head for most of my life, with the realization that it's nothing as bad as what I remember? But now that I'm here, I realize that it doesn't actually matter, because I couldn't show you even if I did want to, as YouTube would nuke this video out of existence 1 second after uploading it. There's another reason why it doesn't matter though. See, viewing the contents of this box didn't actually fill the gaps in my memory like I thought it would. I'm still not even totally sure if AHL 5am is the map I'm remembering. When I first started trying to hunt down the map with the unsettling container, I originally went looking for 2 particular things tied to my memory. One was a pulse rifle from the movie Aliens, and the other a song, The Safety Dance, by Men Without Hats. Neither of these things exist in Action Half-Life, but they are in another mod from around the same time called Desert Crisis. I distinctly remember the iconic whine of the pulse rifle and those singing men sans hats fading away into the distance as I no-clipped into the void, and I could have sworn the box containing the gory imagery was a horizontal chest-style freezer, not a suitcase. To be completely honest, I don't even remember ever playing Action Half-Life at all before making this video. I remember seeing it around at the time, but I wrote it off as a not as cool looking version of a similar mod called The Specialists. Earlier this year, someone uploaded a zip archive containing every different version and patch for Desert Crisis. And as cool as it was to look back through this mod that I loved at the time but completely forgot about, I found absolutely no trace of the imagery found in AHL 5am, even after going through all of the texture files manually. So maybe I'm simply misremembering, and my brain is combining multiple memories into one. Or maybe there is another custom map for Desert Crisis out there that fully copied Hondo's silly, edgy prank. Another box daring to be opened, a tape waiting to be played, a barrier begging to be hopped over.